Hi, guys. Welcome to the Sound Money Hour. I have Daniel. I have Kim. We've got a lot to talk about. So am I hearing something weird with the echoing, Tom? Are you guys hearing everything okay? Or do you hear a little echo?
There's an echo on my end too. I think there might need. Let me see audio. Um, Kim, if you can go to your audio and turn on echo cancellation, I think that might help the problem.
Okay, because I don't want anybody to miss what we have to talk about today. We have a very full agenda. And with that, I'm just going to hand it over to the experts because this is not where I'm an expert yet. But we're all working on it together.
Yeah, we are.
I don't know that that's an issue.
The audio?
I don't hear it anymore. So
yeah, I think we're good now. Hear an echo either.
Okay.
All right. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to recap a little bit about what we discussed last week. And Kim and I, we were going over some of the basics, just basically how a typical legislature works. I think what we discussed last week was that every legislature has its own rules on how they process the legislation. We went over some general techniques on what you should do when you're reaching out to legislators, what you should and shouldn't say. I think we're digging a little bit deeper this week on some of the one, give a few examples of legislation and how we've worked it in different states, and then some do's and don'ts in lobbying. And did you want to touch anything before we continue?
I just said, I think the most important thing is that you just do it.
Yeah.
Is that you get involved and not be intimidated by the process. And Daniel and I have done this a lot, so we might wade into some of the details, but really don't worry about the details. You just need to get involved, and the process will be revealed to you. You will learn the process. You will learn those details. But the thing we never want to do is make it sound scary, because it's really not. It's just people talking to people.
Yeah.
So.
Exactly, and we mentioned that the last episode as well. They're just a normal person that you could probably go to a local restaurant, grab lunch, grab a beer. They're just like us. There's really no difference between a legislator and you as a citizen. The only difference, they have a position of influence and power depending on where they are in the structure of the legislature. And they are just extremely busy. So imagine a year's amount of work crunched down into 3 months typically, right? So they have thousands of pieces of legislation. And one thing that you think about is that they know a little bit about a lot of topics because of the amount of legislation that they are being fed through their legislature. But it's only like an inch deep. They might know a lot about the one issue they care about, which is a mile deep, but that is where your job comes in. Our jobs as citizen lobbyists or lobbyists in general is education. That's number one. Where I'd like to start is the legislative battlefield, how a bill actually goes through. I like repeating steps because the more you repeat it, it actually ingrains. So Schoolhouse Rock is a great summary of how the process works, but it's literally just the surface. And this is where I think I and Kim might go down into the weeds. So I'm going to try to keep it as high level but detailed as possible, and give you guys time frames and when you want to start lobbying. Right? Like most legislative sessions have ended. Right now, like I've reached out to like 5 or 6 legislators. Nobody could make it because they're in the middle of campaign season. South Carolina has a primary tomorrow. In Florida, they have political events. Missouri, same thing. They're in the heat of primary season. So they are 100% focused on trying to get reelected into office, especially incumbents. So when do you want to start pushing? It depends on your state. like a state in like Florida or let's say Utah, where an area is really red or blue, depending on your state, like in Maryland, the primary is the election. Same thing in Florida and certain parts of the state. The primary is the election. So after the primary session, that's when you want to start like reaching out and just letting, hey, congratulations on winning. I'm involved in the sound money movement with Cities for Sound Money, and I want to talk about the potential of pushing some sound money legislation and try to build a relationship. I said last episode, try to get involved in those campaigns. If the primary isn't the end all be all for that election, get involved in that campaign, because they will actually give you the time of day if you start volunteering, right? They appreciate all volunteers, especially if you start getting involved right after the primary, especially if it's competitive general election. Kim, any additions?
Yeah, I would say it's during the campaign season that they try to make themselves accessible.
Yeah.
So look on their calendars, look for events where they're going to be speaking to the people, let them know what the issues are that you care about. I would be very careful about separating any donations, including volunteer service, with requests for legislation.
Right.
That can be viewed as a quid pro quo. So, and I think in every state that's not lawful. So yes, by all means, be involved in the political process, start to finish, including volunteering on campaigns, but have a very clear separation between an ask of the legislators. So, but at the very least, they're accessible. Go find them. They're making themselves available to the public right now. And by the way, they may be 100% focused on their campaign, but they are still working legislation.
Yeah.
So they can't just pause their duties as a legislator to go campaign. So they are also working on next year's bills already. And so it really is the time to talk to them about the bills you want them to start looking at for 27.
Yeah.
So I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
When you're talking about to go and volunteer and work on a campaign, but you don't at that point know, unless it's quite clear who's going to win, you don't know who's going to win. And like for someone like me, let's just use me as an example, where I don't really feel close to the Republican Party, and at the other side, I don't really feel close to the Democratic Party. So how do you decide whose campaign you're going to work on? Because the point is to get sound money legislation, right?
Yeah.
So if you're going to be working on somebody that is already campaigning, but they're not yet elected, I guess, how does that work, or how do you make those choices? Like, who would you work for?
I would say if you have an incumbent who's been in office for a few terms and is leadership and they're in your district, I would say volunteer in that campaign. And really, it does get a little bit more tricky if, let's say, there's a political year where incumbents are being kicked out, like during the Tea Party era or during during the midterms from 2018, right? A lot of incumbents and those who were part of the MAGA movement didn't win re-election. So it really depends on the political position, the political situation at the time. But generally, incumbents win more often than not. So if you have somebody who is in leadership, the party has an incentive to pump a lot of money in to ensure that leadership stays in power.
Okay.
My recommendation would be no candidate is a single issue candidate. No voter is a single issue voter. Although legislators tend to have areas of expertise or focus that they care about the most, voters can frequently, kind of have their top 1, 2, or 3 issues. And so what I would look for is someone whose principles align with you most. and align with the things you care about the most. Because as we've mentioned, a legislator may have upwards of 1,000 pieces of policy in front of them. You can't pull him or her on how they're going to vote on everything. The best you can do is look at what their North Star is, what the principles that define them, that guide them are. And for the sound money movement, those are going to generally be free market proponents, people that support the markets being able to do what markets do best and let people have the freedom to operate and conduct commerce within those free markets. And so you may find a candidate or a legislator that doesn't know a lot about the sound money movement, but if they're inclined toward free markets and free commerce, then they're more likely to align with the sound money movement. And so that doesn't necessarily reside in one party over the other, although I think it generally finds its home in one party more than the other. But I would look for the people who uphold and embrace the principles that you care about the most.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would say that this isn't a party issue. We have had tremendous success. Yeah, we have had tremendous success from both sides of the aisle.
Definitely.
For when it comes to the Democrats, I would focus more on the economic justice angle of the legislation, on how it is how the current monetary system and inflation is negatively impacting the constituents within this district, and that you have a solution that has passed through 12 dates on how to solve the issue. Go ahead.
And even the policy itself, Daniel, this might be a good place to throw in an example. There are states that have tax exemptions on bullion and specie that only kick in at $1,000 or more purchase. So if you're buying less than $1,000 because maybe your income is lower, your discretionary cash is lower, you don't enjoy that tax benefit. But the people buying hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars get that tax benefit. So, looking for people that embrace free markets in general are more likely to be proponents of the sound money movement, but also how they go and further design that policy and the implementation of it. Does it really regard the individual's ability to access this financial freedom and the financial equity that Daniel mentioned? So, yeah, again, that's a principle more than a specific policy.
100%, I agree. And every situation, every state is different. The political situation in Missouri or Tennessee or whatever is not the same. There's something called good old boy networks with different regions, right? And they look out for each other and they help each other in campaigns. So part of it is the basic level, building a relationship with your local representative or state senator. The next level is starting to get an idea of what the political situation is in your state and your region. Like in states like Missouri and South Carolina, they have something called the Freedom Caucus. And if they are a minority in the state, a lot of the times they don't get any legislation through, because in a lot of states that have a Freedom Caucus, they're fighting against the establishment, and the establishment kind of suppresses. Like, you got to try to figure out beyond just knowing who your rep is, because you might have a phenomenal rep. We had some phenomenal reps in South Carolina when we pushed this bill in 2024, and we had like 30 co-sponsors from the Freedom Caucus and a few from the main caucus, the Republican caucus, but didn't go anywhere because there's this infighting. The first level is understanding who your rep is. The next level is what is going on in your state. Look at the news, look and see what's going on within the legislature itself. Because in Missouri, in states where it's primarily one party, we call it a uni-party system, they control everything, but there's infighting, right? I like states where it's more 50-50 because you know that they're going to be voting along party lines versus a uni-party system where you don't know what the dynamics are unless you start, probing and prodding and trying to figure it out. So these are just some of the things to keep in mind when you're starting, because a well-informed lobbyist, citizen lobbyist, is the best lobbyist. So start off building relations, then start figuring out and asking questions of, maybe the aides that work for the incumbent, like what's going on up there, what should I know. Build. That's another key thing. We mentioned this last time. Build a relationship with staff. Staff knows they got their fingers on the heartbeat of the legislature and what's going on in the Capitol.
Well, and again, your representative, everybody, I think there's only one state that has a unicameral legislature, but in all the other states, you have a senator and you have a member of the House of Representatives or assemblyman, depending on the state. So you typically have two representatives you can go to and ask them to consider running legislation that you care about. That's their job, is to help his or her constituency solve their problems. And if they're not open to that, nothing prevents you from going and finding someone else who does. But start with your own representative. They will feel a responsibility to really consider what you're asking them to do. That's their job, and you are their boss. You hire them through an election. And so that's a good place to start. But if they're not the right one, go find someone else who is.
Next, I would say after you start building that relationship, let's say you get involved in the local election, they get to know you better, you start asking the questions, you start getting a feel for what's going on at your legislature. Then you want to figure out, like, who are the people who make the decisions. Like we said last time, leadership and the committee chairs, they're the ones that really have the most influence when one of the legislation gets through. So you want to figure out the power structure, the hierarchy of the legislature, and the party that's really in control, right? And once you know which party's in control of the legislature, you can start working both sides of the aisle. It doesn't matter if you're a Republican or Democrat. This is nonpartisan. And start talking to members of the other aisle. And one thing is, know what your talking points are, right? And that's, you want to learn, and we'll have resources to give you talking points as well through Zang International and C4SM. We have a PDF that we're about to publish for you guys on talking points on piece of legislation specifically, and how to talk to your legislators to bring these points. And once you figure out the committees, you want to start reaching out to those committee members after you know where the bill is going to be assigned, because the first part is building a relationship. Second is getting the piece of legislation filed and sponsored by a legislator. And if your local representative isn't the right one, you ask your local rep, like, hey, do you think this would if you can sponsor this, do you think it'll have a good chance getting through? And they'll be honest with you, like, right now I'm on the outs or this or that. They'll start guiding you on who to help, on who to talk to about sponsoring a bill. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as having a relationship.
I mean, definitely, if someone came to me and asked me to run a bill that I had zero expertise in, either I'm going to scale that learning curve myself, or I'm going to refer that to one of, my colleagues who, this person is much better on insurance. They live insurance, live and breathe insurance. They're a better person to do an insurance policy. And so your representative will generally guide you on that, because if they care about the bill themselves, they want it to be successful. They're going to want to place it in the right hands. And maybe they want to take it themselves. And I think when it comes to power dynamics, I think right now, at the time that this podcast is being recorded, we just witnessed really the power struggles in the U.S. Senate, and lots of political demands for the Senate to act a certain way and to deal with procedures a certain way and to have certain policies heard. And then a lot of blame gets put on, Leader Thune in the Senate, because he is he's the top guy in the Senate. And so there are those things, and there are those dynamics where Speaker of the House, Senate President, other members of leadership, committee leadership, they absolutely do influence that process. But it's not on you to have to know all those dynamics. It's up to your legislator to know how to navigate those, and that really is what makes a good legislator is do they know how to build the coalition among their colleagues to get the votes that they need to get something passed. And so I think it's worth it to be aware that there are power dynamics. Daniel and I worked on a bill this year, and I won't mention the state, but we had great sponsors that had a lot of influence in the body. But the Senate president had some personal issues, and the Senate president shut it all down. And so while that can happen, it's really, I just wouldn't worry about that. As the constituent that's going in and advocating, you do your best to work with your legislator. It's on them to navigate the complexities of the process and the political environment. Be aware that exists, but don't worry about you having to navigate it. That's pretty internal to the process itself. So, but knowing, like Daniel said, once a bill gets assigned to a committee, now your work is focused on the committee members, and that's who you're trying to influence at that point.
But getting it up to that point, right, where it's going into committee, that's what you're talking about earlier. Who's your rep?
Who's your rep?
What's going on in your state, so you can speak to, and it'd probably be pretty easy to find out what those hot buttons are. And then you can use those hot buttons for your rep to get next to the rep or get close, and tell me anywhere where I've kind of goofed up. But then if you're aware of what your representative's hot buttons are, and you're either volunteering or you are getting next to them, if they are not the right person to push the bill through, they'll tell you who that right person is, right?
Usually. Yeah.
Usually.
Like an example, in Florida, when I first hired as legislative director, before I was executive director, I just reached out to a legislator that I've known for years. He was a city commissioner. He was the head of the Republican Party of my county. And I met with him, and he immediately told me, he's like, these are the three legislators you need to ask that are in finance, that are in crypto, that are in gold and silver, because I don't know anything about it. And they'll just point you in the right direction. And then it's a hunt. You start hunting and meeting and like, hey, Representative so-and-so told me to give you a call, or have him send an email and connect. Same thing. I did that in the Senate. I went to a senator who, luckily in Florida, immediately, Senator Rodriguez took it on, but she would have pointed me in the right direction if it wasn't the right legislator. And the same thing in New Hampshire and South Carolina. We went to several legislators before we found the Freedom Caucus. So, asking if they would be interested in pushing that, do you build a relationship? They say no, they'll push you, they'll point you in the right direction.
Yep.
So, so the next step after, you build that relationship, you get a sponsor for the bill, gets assigned to leadership. The next thing that you're going to want to figure out and understand is there's things that happen during the process where, like, once you file the legislation, it will go to a committee, or not committee, but the bill drafters, to put it in the right format. And then even then they might change it a little bit. So there are things in between the original version and the version that comes out as the sponsored version that might tweak. So before they actually make it live and put it out on the website, the representative will get informed on a draft copy before they finalize it and sponsor it. Once it's sponsored and approved according to the way the sponsor wants it, then you need to figure out, because this is sound money legislation. It's going to impact tax. It's going to impact different financial areas. It's going to bring up the eye of the revenue, like how we're going to accept gold and silver. So these are things that are going to happen. Some states, like in Maryland, it didn't happen until the last few hours, where they said, "Hey, we got a problem with this. How we're going to accept gold and silver?" We gave them the answer, and that's why we didn't get legal tender in Maryland. It was literally a last minute thing that the Department of Revenue didn't pay attention to it until it got to the House floor.
Well, and typically, if you have brought a proposal to a legislator, they will typically involve you in the drafting process, and they will ask you, "Hey, does this cover it? Does it go too far? Not far enough? Did we define it in the right ways? Does this solve the problem, or promote what you're looking to do?" So, but somewhere along the line, other people are going to see that. And they may have other things they want to put in your bill. So, or they won't like your definitions, or they might want to take it a different direction. So there is a lot of back and forth, but typically in the process, they'll involve you if you're going to them.
If the bill doesn't have the blessing of leadership, or even if it does, depending on the situation, you're going to have people, if your bill has traction, that they're going to want to attach their bills as an amendment. Once you have, once you have the bill, it has traction, has the blessing of leadership. You might have people who want to add similar bills in the according to the same content or area of the legislation. And that's what happened in Missouri. That's what happened in really Missouri. This is where it really happened. People just threw a bunch of bills and it killed it one year. And sometimes there's just a battle between the House and the Senate. And this is where that political understanding happens. If there is a power struggle between the Senate and the House, which happens often, the House thinks that they're the power because they represent the most people, and the Senate thinks they're the bigger, older class. So they're going to do this power struggle. They might leverage your bill like they did in Missouri because it's very popular and you have a majority of the Senate and the House that wants to vote for it. They might hold it hostage. Right. So you want to, there's things that happen in the process.
But this is how our government was designed.
Yeah.
So our government was designed to move slowly, to be very deliberate, to have tension between each chamber, then to have tension between the branches of government. The House and the Senate absolutely was created to have tension so that you have the give and take, the compromise. You don't have any single faction of the governmental process being able to just steamroll because they have some simple majority or even a super majority. And then there's that tension between the legislature and the governor, the executive branch, and then of course the courts. So what sometimes people view as broken or slow really is, it was designed to very carefully move forward. And most legislation that's ever proposed is going to tell you what you have to do, tell you something you can't do, or it's going to figure out how to take money out of your pocket and where to spend it. And so, framers of constitutions designed this government to have those tensions. And so I have such a great respect for that. Even when I'm frustrated that the Senate is messing with a good thing. When I was in the House, it was designed that way because when the Senate sends their bills over to us, we're going to mess with their bills too. And so it is a lot of give and take, and it's meant to be a healthy tension. And while you can have people in leadership that will kind of influence the process a little bit more, I think most legislative leadership does respect the process and is respectful of allowing bills to have their day and legislators to have their say and work the process. It's not as common that leadership will say that's not ever going to see the light of day, although it definitely happens. But yeah, it does feel frustrating sometimes when your bill is moving slowly and it's being hung up somewhere, or someone's coming in and submitting amendments, but really it's the way it was designed, and it could be worse. So,
Well, yeah, I mean, it's supposed to be a series of checks and balances.
yep.
So that's kind of what I think I'm hearing. And I think, do we have some questions? Because I want to make sure that we do. Okay, so let me throw this out there and then we can come back to this. This is from Connor McCarthy, 5960. Hi, Lynette. Any chance you could please explain the difference between, well, okay, so he's asking for the difference between inflation and currency debasement. So that's kind of like, can you show up tomorrow? I know, Connor, you're usually at the live. I will address at the live. Will you pull that? So it's the questions on legislation, how we're talking to them. If there are any questions about that, let's go there. Whoop, did you say? Okay. Robert 4222. Connecticut has not declared metals as legal tender, but passed legislation removing sales and use tax on purchases of gold, silver, platinum, and palladium bullion. This makes acquiring precious metals for investment or potential trade cheaper in the state. So that's more of a statement. I didn't see a question in there, but do you want to comment on that?
That's part of the work we're doing, is trying to remove those taxes on specie and bullion in the states. And most states do not have capital gains tax. We're seeing proposals for complete neutrality on capital gains. But sales and use tax needs some work still in a lot of states. Daniel, you might have the exact numbers, but another attempts, I want to say we probably saw an additional 6 or more states try to remove sales tax on precious metals this year. Mixed success. So we just keep coming back next year.
And just, I mean, when things don't really work the way we think we want it to work, we want them to work. For me, I always look in the mirror and say, okay, what can I do different? And that's one thing. As a stockbroker, Shearson gave me this probably almost the first day, and it's something I've used the rest of my life, actually. And they say, people try something and then it doesn't work, and they're like, oh, they didn't get it. They. But the reality is that you sit there and you say, okay, what did I do right to get as far as I got? I showed up, right? I went to a meeting. I did something. Then you say, what can I do righter to get even further? Right?
Yeah.
And that's how you build it. And that's how we're building this, isn't it?
100%. And it literally takes one person to really change the world, or the face of a piece of legislation, right? The right testimony, the right person that actually has a talking point, that has a relationship with the legislators or legislature. You'll be amazed what one person can do. But it isn't just the one person that's a hero. It's a coalition. Right? You need you need a group of people, because when you have a larger group pushing the legislation, you might have that hero in the group, but now you have a force multiplier. You have 10, 20, 30. In Missouri, we had like 40 people come, and we all lobbied and went to every single legislator and coordinated and teamed up, and it was all volunteers. Right? We got together with Goldback. We got together with Alpine Gold. We got together with Kinesis in pushing the Florida legislation. We had the Economic War Room, who was on the other side. There was a large coalition of stakeholders, right? So the next step is trying to figure out who the stakeholders are. You might start lobbying for a piece of legislation with a group of people, but then you're starting to hear rumors and murmurs like, hey, there's another person who came and talked about this bill. And that's what happened in Florida. Like, we were lobbying for a year, and all of a sudden we start hearing about these group of guys that are coming and talking, and like, oh, really? And for 6 months we couldn't figure out who it was, and finally in December we found out. And then we got together and we tried to start working together. So you want to start figuring out who the stakeholders are, whether they're other nonprofits, whether they're the bankers, whether they are, gold and silver companies, because if your bill does impact, it's going to impact the industry, it's going to impact individual lives, it's going to impact banking, the way the government functions, that they start to accept gold and silver. So there's definitely stakeholders. It might take time for the stakeholders to appear, might be instantaneous, but you definitely want to figure out who the stakeholder groups are so that you can start working with them if you're on the same page. If you're not same page, then you need to figure out, all right, how do we work together to try to get the best piece of legislation and try to work things out. Kim?
So one place to start in a state too is, who are your real influential think tanks, and most states have them. So for instance, in Texas, the Texas Public Policy Institute has a very big influence on the legislature. So if the Texas Public Policy Institute, I think I've got that correct, if they support your bill, that's awesome. You want them giving testimony. And this would be my word of caution. We live in a day and age where we kind of put people in political boxes, in ideological boxes, and it's the us's versus thems. But sometimes when it comes to the issue you care about, you're looking for friends. You might not agree with them on other issues, but if you agree on this issue, you're friends on this issue. And tomorrow you'll fight each other on a different issue. But for today, find the allies that are going to help you in that coalition. And sometimes you shake hands and you just know, we're friends today, we're going to spar tomorrow.
But you know what? That's part of the community. And when did we lose that? I mean, when I was in high school, I loved the debate team, right? It was, I could take a position on anything. It didn't matter. It was just a lot of fun. And you learn something because everybody's bringing something different to the conversation. And no one person can understand everything or see everything. And so I actually really, really love that, Kim, because to me, that's a way to build community and to make everything and everyone a lot more powerful. If everybody just thinks the same, that's a cult. We don't need cults. We need communities. So I really appreciate you bringing that out, because I couldn't agree with that more.
Well, you mentioned the high school debate team or your college debate team. One of the methods in that is that you often didn't have the choice whether you picked whether you had to defend the proponent side or the opponent side. And I think that exercise helps people try to get into someone else's shoes and try to understand that there is another side. And so I would say in this process, I mean, we are who we are ideologically. I mean, by our ages in particular, we got to know what we are politically, but we can find allies in places we just don't expect. And so to be open-minded to who those allies might be in the sound money movement or whatever your issue is, be open to, you might have some unexpected friends. And, one of those for us this last year was the Bankers Association. And not that they're enemies, it's just that we play in different sandboxes and we have different worlds. But we found both of our worlds colliding on some things that were not good for our industry or the banking industry. And so for a minute, we were very allied and built a coalition there in a number of states.
Oh, I really like that. Let's see if we can take a couple more, because we're starting to get down to the wire and I want to make sure. And Robert 4222, beware, well, you already said this, but beware the omnibus bills and what they try to sneak in during the 11th hour.
Yep.
But I don't know how you can, really overcome that, because if it's the 11th hour, you had no opportunity, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So for your state legislatures, most of them, they don't allow you to put unrelated matters into bills. So they call it a single subject bill, or they call it the bill's capture, depending on your state. So most of them have rules that you can't put, you know, how many chickens can you have in a backyard in a tax bill? You know, so they're going to, you know, still have to be related to the bill, but you can find appropriations, especially like Daniel saw last year in Missouri. Was it Missouri, where the policy itself wasn't moving as well in the policy piece, but it ended up getting into a budget bill. So that's where things happen that get snuck in, is in a budget bill that's, you know, 1,000 pages or a couple hundred pages, and there's one line item in there.
Missouri. And what happened was the legislation wasn't moving in the Senate. It got through the House, and it was stuck in the Senate. And then it was Senator Moon and I forget, maybe Senator Bradford, I think it was. There was a single subject bill that was pushed by the governor, all the leadership, and the bankers, and that's how we got the Constitutional Money Act in. They made an amendment on the Senate floor, and they added the Constitutional Money Act, which was basically a page and a half in the middle of a banking bill, and they was voted on, and we passed it through Senate and through the House, and it went to the governor, and they weren't going to veto it because it was a top priority bill, and it was a genius stroke of legislative legislative tactic to add the sound money bill into one of the most important financial bills the state of Missouri was trying to push. So I don't know how that happened, got it through, and the Senate passed it every year. It always got to the Senate. It was always the House that failed. So the last year, the House passed it finally, and then the Senate did this move, and it passed it through after 3 years of trying. So sometimes an omnibus bill, when you're in a good bill, is a good thing. So
yeah, so a banking bill, not a budget bill, but yeah, there are those legislative tactics. They tend to be, you know, not the most common thing, but they can still have big things in them.
So Omnidon 2000 just has a question, but it's kind of a question and an answer. Gold and silver are already money. It's in the Constitution, isn't it?
Well, technically, it's not. It's not. It doesn't explicitly say gold and silver is money in the Constitution. That's a misunderstanding in a lot of people in the movement. The only place that says gold and silver is Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1, where it says states can only make gold and silver coin tender for the payment of debt. Where people are misunderstanding is that the Coinage Act of 1792, where we defined how many grains of gold and silver in American coin. And when people refer back to the Constitution, they're thinking about the Act of 1792, which was only a few years after the Constitution was made. The only place where gold and silver is mentioned is Article 1, Section 10.
So Article 1, Section 8 gives Congress the power to coin money. And then Article 10 is is a negative mandate. It's states can make nothing but gold and silver a legal tender. So that's what we're seeing in these states. The language is very specific. It's a recognition of gold and silver as legal tender. So it affirms that allowance in the U.S. Constitution. But you know, for people to be able to exchange it more freely in the state because it has state legal tender recognition, goes broader than what Congress has done to date. So that's why we're trying to move this in all 50 states.
Okay, so could you go into a little bit more about that broadening that you were just referring to?
So, Daniel, you might be better at this. You have a little more experience, but again, anything that Congress and designates Congress issues, the federal government issues as money, that enjoys legal tender status in all 50 states.
Right.
But it has not specifically designated anything outside of what they issue. And there's a whole lot of gold and silver in this country that wants to move, and people want to move it. And they want to be able to freely exchange it, freely use it, freely invest in it. And having the states exercise their allowance under the U.S. Constitution to recognize nothing but gold and silver means states can allow more gold product to move.
Right. So right now there are $5 that are legal tender. There is the Federal Reserve note, which is just base currency. You have the gold dollar, the silver dollar, the palladium dollar, and the platinum dollar. Those $5 are all legal tender across the United States and its territories. What Article 1, Section 10 allows is it allows states to define legal tender coin and broaden the definition beyond the United States federal legal tender. So, for example, Missouri is the most permissive sound money legislation in the world. If it has 1% gold or 1% silver, it's legal tender in Missouri. Anything can be legal tender, though. That's the way that we wrote it. Other states, they're very specific. Like in Florida, it's 995 gold purity, 999 silver purity, and it can only have the mint mark weight and purity on it to be legal tender. Very specific. Other states, they say that it has to be determined by a court of competent jurisdiction if it's beyond U.S. coinage. So before we really got into the movement and really framing our own version of the law, there was a movement, the sound money movement, that started in 2011. Before, even Keith Weiner from Monetary Metals was lobbying in the early 2000s, and Edwin Vieira, and they had different versions. Now we're more uniform, and we're working with ALEC and other organizations to create a more more permissive sound money legislation to broaden what is legal tender. And what legal tender is, it doesn't mean that the government absolutely has to take it. The only state right now that is required to take gold and silver is Missouri, but they are only required to take digital gold and silver. No state is bold enough yet or ready and prepared enough to figure out how to take physical gold and silver. One, if they did, would add a major fiscal note, which is one of the things you need to look out for. Missouri had a fiscal note of like $72 million because they wanted to have multiple offices, like assaying equipment, hiring assayers, all these things. Texas had like a $25 million fiscal note. Maryland had every state tries to add a fiscal note when they have to start taking physical gold and silver. So the way we combat that was just make gold and silver legal tender and make it optional for the state, like we did in Florida. It's optional for the state in Missouri and Florida to take it. They just need to open up an account with a bank, a qualified public depository, which is, don't worry about that. It just means a bank that takes government funds. Like in Florida, if a county, a city, they can do it now. They just need to open up an account with a bank that's willing to take gold and silver. So that's the only way we were able to get the bills passed with no fiscal note, make it optional for state. So
one thing too, Daniel, you mentioned this, and I don't love the statutes or the bills that they designate or they recognize U.S. issued, federal government issued gold and silver, or gold and silver that a court of competent jurisdiction rules in an unappealable ruling. So somewhere somebody copied a lot of words that got replicated in a number of states. Here's why I don't like that, because we've already talked about separate powers. Legislatures legislate. Courts, if someone wants to challenge it and take it to court, that is a role that the court has reserved for them if someone brings that challenge. But for a legislator to say, yeah, I'm going to let the court make my policy. I just want those people to go back to Civics 101 and learn about separate powers again. Legislate. Don't leave it to the executive branch to make the policy. Don't leave it to the judicial branch to make the policy. You, as a legislator, write your policy. And the assumption is the people who are running bills with this language, they already believe that the U.S. Constitution has an allowance for this anyway, but they defer their legislative power to the court in their own policy. And I don't know why some legislators have done that. And but yeah, I think it's it's understood that any bill that passes can be referred to the courts for a constitutional question. But one thing I like about the bills we're seeing now, namely Missouri, is they're making the policy and they're deciding this is what the policy is going to be. We are going to recognize gold and silver as legal tender so long as it's valued for its metal content and it's marked with its weight and purity. We're going to say in our state, that's our policy. Someone can take us to court if they want, but they don't defer and abdicate their own legislative power to another branch. So it is my recommendation that in fact, the ALEC model policy doesn't have any of that.
Yeah, and just one more thing about legal tender. It isn't just the state accepting gold and silver for the payment of debts. It also does two other things. One, elevates gold and silver to the same level as other legal tender coinage from the federal government. So right now, in Florida and Texas, it doesn't go into law until July 1st here. If you use gold and silver or anything outside of the dollar, you don't have the same legal contractual protections as you do with using cash. I was in a situation where I did a barter deal when I was a back-end crypto miner, and the guy stole thousands of dollars worth of equipment from me because there was no cash exchange. I had no legal protections. It wasn't grand theft. There are no protections with barter. So that's one of the major reasons we want to elevate gold and silver to legal tender status so it has the same legal protections as cash. The second thing it does, I forgot, and let's flip my mind. I'm sure it's important, but when I remember, I will mention it. There was a reason why legal tender was important. Yeah.
I love some of the comments in the chat too about some natural law and really ultimately where we get our law from. And
go ahead. Why don't you just read the question? Because you can see them. For me,
they're talking about, let's see, resistance chicks, about sovereignty of states, but we do have a U.S. Constitution that we all agreed to be part of a union that does give certain powers under the Constitution to the federal government. So we are trying to navigate that and make sure states can recognize all of their sovereignty and their authority to its fullest potential. So where we have experienced some things through laws of man over the last 250 years, some of that takes a little bit of correction, and that's what we're trying to do. And so I love the references to the highest power of law, where that comes from.
And I remember the second thing in regards to that. The second reason we want to make it legal tender is because it's the state exercising state authority and right to make gold and silver legal tender. It's more of a statement from the state saying, hey, federal government, we have this in our U.S. Constitution that we have the right and authority to declare something legal tender outside of what you say. We're going to exercise that. And it's the states basically taking the reins of what the rights that they have and exercising that. So protecting people and giving them legal protection to use gold, silver, and the state saying, hey, we're doing this as well.
Right. Part of that being that Section 10 that has that allowance, but also the 10th Amendment of federalism and states' rights. So.
Exactly. It's funny, the 10th Amendment and Section 10 are both 10, you know.
If we're looking at numerologically speaking, that's a conclusion.
Yep.
And also a new beginning. It's a conclusion and a new beginning. So that kind of makes sense. And so this has been really great. Do we have it? Did you see any others that you'd want to address? Any other questions, Because you can see it better than I can because you're closer.
No other questions, but they were talking about G. Edward Griffin and having his red pill Vegas events. He's doing, he's been doing these events, pushing sound for a long time. So there's quite a few good speakers, apparently, powerhouse lineup of speakers for the red pill event with G. Edward Griffin.
I got invited.
Oh, you're one of them. Great.
I can't even tell you. And it's funny because I was talking to Mr. Griffin and he was kind of asking me some questions. And I think he was kind of skeptical to begin with. And then we started talking about, and I told him, I said, well, the second Monday of every month at 6 p.m. Eastern time, we have the Sound Money Hour. And that and tokenization, I think those were the two that he decided, yes, she should be coming to the red pill. I cannot even tell you how excited I am to be able to have that opportunity and to speak.
Yeah, he's one of the few OGs in the Sound Money movement that are still active, right? We've had many past, some who've retired, but yeah, he is one of the OGs. I would call him one of the godfathers of the movement because he wrote Creature from Jekyll Island. He's like one of the heroes too.
I totally agree with that. And it's like when I also got to meet and I interviewed Ron Paul. I mean, again, he's like, it's up at that level. So to have him invite me is
yeah.
This week I know I have some level of time, but I was working on the presentation, and I don't know whether it's just because of the inspiration or what. I do think this is my best work, and there's some stuff in here that I think we can use in the Citizens for Sound Money movement.
Yeah.
So,
and I do.
Oh yeah, I hope you guys that are. Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say you guys that are talking about the red pill. I hope you're coming, and I hope I'll see you there. Very exciting. And just before that, I get to go to the Rick Rule Symposium, and I'm a keynote speaker there. So, and I go there, and then I get on a plane and I go to the red pill. So it's going to be a busy week, but I'm just like, oh my God, I'm so excited.
Absolutely. And I there was a comment that I just want to clarify because this is also a misconception. Somebody said I'm holding my breath to see Michigan mint coins. Now, making gold and silver legal tender is not the same as minting. States cannot mint their own gold coins. They can only recognize gold and silver as legal tender. If they mint their own gold coins, they're violating the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8. That is clearly that is clearly against what the Constitution says in the beginning of Article Section 10 as well. No state can mint coins, except for making legal gold coins and silver coin tender for the payment of debt. So just be careful when people are saying, hey, we need our own coins. That's unconstitutional.
You've brought this up before because that is not actually what we want. We don't want the states mushing in private business. We don't want the federal government mushing in private business. So, we don't want the states minting and taking over control. Do you want to?
Right. Yeah. So the loophole around that is they can make a commemorative round by a private company, and then because they declared gold and silver legal tender, their commemorative round is already legal tender because they declared it so. So they're not minting their own coins, like Texas did that with the private Boolean depository, whatever. They some.
Well, that's actually in court right now. So I'm watching that very closely to see, because working for Goldback, we make a product in the private sector. And the Texas state government wants to compete with us by making their own thing. And the question really is, you're making a commemorative coin, but you also just declared it legal tender. So you can't say it's not that you're not making money now. Yeah. So very, very interesting court case. And I would encourage people to follow that. And that one's interesting. And so, Yeah, go ahead, Daniel.
And the reason why that is interesting, it wouldn't happen in any other state except for Texas, because the private company holds the Texas Bullion Depository is also a state agency. So that is why it's going to court, because it's the purpose is the public-private partnership, but they're also a state agency. So whatever they produce is the state producing it, which is why
It's the states. It's the state's money.
right.
States
Exactly.
wants to make money, and competing with the private sector. And, because we didn't learn enough from the federal government being in financial services as deeply as they are. We want to keep them all out. Just keep them all out. Let the private sector, let the free markets do what free markets do. And because that's what works best. And so I think we want to kind of summarize what we talked about in this past hour. Again, I like to emphasize to not be afraid of the process. There are some complexities in it, but it is very simple. Reach out to your legislator first. And if they don't feel like they're capable or the best person to handle it, they usually will refer you to someone else, and stay engaged in that process as they're drafting and starting to move it. They'll usually keep you involved. And Daniel, to coalitions.
Yeah. Join Citizens for Sound Money. Start getting involved. Get other people who are like-minded. I call it sound money gospel. Don't keep it to yourself. I talk to people all the time. People are sick and tired of listening to me talk about gold and silver, because that's all I talk about. Because to me, making gold and silver legal is about liberty and freedom.
It is.
If we can break the shackles of fiat currency on humanity, it's going to make humanity more free and more prosperous. So get people involved, get them interested, show them, send them to Lynette, send them to Mike Maloney's Hidden Secrets of Money, educate them, send them to G. Ed Ribbon. Education is key. Learn about the process, learn about the movement. Try to become an expert in this thing called the sound money movement, and start learning about the legislation that has passed. 12 states have made gold and silver legal tender. Read all 12 pieces of legislation. And I would say Missouri is hands down the best legislation. Read that, memorize, eat it up, and try to bring that legislation to your state, because Missouri is the most permissive sound money legislation in the world.
These are great and wise words, and we're going to help you do it with our dime cards. And I'm actually going to be recording some new, very small pieces, so you can show them a piece of sound money, a piece of silver, and the new money that is just garbage. And so, yeah, you guys are the army. And remember, if you're a client, you get the first one free and then the rest at our cost, because we just want you to distribute them. So thank you guys. Thank you for showing up here. We're going to do it again in a month, the second Monday of every month at 6 o'clock Eastern time. So you don't have to worry about the time change. And really keep those questions coming. And we have access if you have any other questions as you're going through this process yourself. Maybe we can hear about some of those stories from people that are making this attempt and reaching out, and what happened. And, do you need some help getting over the hump or whatever? So now maybe we can have some action items before we come back in a month, and let's see how everybody's doing with that. And you guys can give us guidance.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say if there's any homework, identify your state rep, identify your state senator, and find out what committees they sit on. That is the homework. If you're listening to this, find out who your state rep is, state senator, and what committees they sit in. And then, we'll figure out, we'll discuss that next week, because next month, we're going to have a state legislator, and this state legislator is going to be the future speaker of the House of this state. So make sure.
I would add one more piece to the homework. Once you identify them, find out where they're going to be in your community, because almost all the House members are up for election this year. So go find them somewhere, pop into a town hall, because they're never more ears open than campaign season.
Yeah, and you know what? On top of that, send an introductory email. Say, hey, I'm a constituent in your district. I'm Daniel Diaz to the state rep. I'm Daniel Diaz to the state senator. Just introduce yourself. You say you're looking to get involved in the political process and maybe do some citizen lobbying, and just introduce yourself so they now have an email. Staff sees it, and you're warming up that relationship.
I think that's great. And that's pretty easy that I think we can do. And we just want to know where our representatives and the senators, what committees that they're sitting on, and where will they be at, like town hall meetings or what have you, and just send them that initial intro email and start to get involved. And with that,
So we're going to ask you, Lynette, next time.
yeah, I know. I wrote it down, and I have Jessica right here, so I'll do it. Or she'll do it. One of us will do it. For sure. No, I mean, that, you know what? Honestly, the point of doing this and the point of doing this live is the same reason why I started putting out whatever, because then your toes are held to the fire.
Yeah.
And I have no problem having my toes held to the fire.
Yeah. Finding their committees. Most people, I think a lot of people know who their rep is, but yeah, digging in and finding their committees is a little bit of homework.
That's awesome. So, and look, one thing I know 100%, one person, maybe one person can't change the world, but if we all come together, if we can just get 3% of the global population to support the sound money movement, we got a shot. We can get sound money back in the monetary system again. I know we can. And until next we meet, wherever you are in the world, please be safe out there. Bye-bye.